Welcome to APA's weekly webinar. My name is Billy Zadig, Manager, Special Projects for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA webpage later this afternoon. You'll receive a follow-up email in the next couple of days with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as links to our upcoming webinars. We have webinars planned out through the end of 2021, and many are open for registration. Professional continuing education and AIA-CLU credits are being offered for today's program. If you are an AIA professional requiring a certificate, please send an email to me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @apa.org, along with your AIA membership number if you have not done so in the past. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your question in the chat box, and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by our presenter. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Rick Buist. Rick, take it away.
Thanks, Billy. Okay, so this is a presentation about green roofs, and it's maybe a bit unusual because I go through some of the good practices, which I'm sure everybody has been sort of inundated with green roof best practices in many ways and at a lot of conferences and conventions. But I also talk about the bad and the ugly, and this is what I would say is unusual, because I think it's important to understand the things that can go wrong in order to make sure that the green roof industry becomes well established as a long-term viable marketplace. Before doing so, I wanted to just introduce you to who I am and who we are. So BioRoof, I'm the president of BioRoof Systems. We are green roof manufacturer distributor. We've been around for about 15 years officially, and myself personally, I've been involved with green roofs for about 2 decades, a little over 2 decades. We have more system configurations available than any other competitor in the market. BioRoof has its own 6 sort of different system configurations, and then we also are a licensed distributor of the ZeroFloor products, which are well known in the industry, and they have 5 different system configurations. We've patented a number of products, and we've been involved in a lot of green roofs throughout North America for many years now. Some of the other things that we do provide services, restorations, maintenance, consultation, green roof inspection, and we end up doing a lot of design assistance. Just to give you a sense of some of the projects that have been done over the past with our brands, the ZeroFloor system on the Ford Dearborn plant, it's the largest extensive green roof in the world. We've recently completed a modular tray type system, which is also the largest modular system installed in the world. So that gives you some sense of who we are. I'm not going to turn this into a big sales pitch, so that just gives you an idea of myself and our company and our perspective on where we're coming from. I'm just going to go through these sort of mandatory slides that are part of this presentation. Please take a moment to read it. Naturally, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what facility managers are faced with after a green roof has been installed. We're going to talk about some of the ways that problems can be avoided, some of the requirements of green roofs, and hopefully at the end of this, you'll be able to look at your green roof and have a sense of how to make it work better in the future. These are some of the things we're going to try to accomplish. Just take a few seconds to read the APPA slides here. And as Billy noted in her introduction, this seminar does qualify for continuing education credits with AIA. Okay, let's get going. So let's say you're a facility manager, building's just been built, or maybe the roof has just been installed and you have a new green roof. Congratulations. A lot of green roofs are being installed all over the US right now. Basically, universities, hospitals, commercial buildings, a lot of institutional buildings, many companies are installing green roofs, and mostly for the bigger sort of concept reasons of stormwater management, urban heat island mitigation, meaning trying to cool the downtown cores of cities, that sort of thing. Also for aesthetic reasons, and it sort of fits into the overall green strategy that's sort of overtaking the building industry over the last 10 to 20 years. In this presentation, I'm going to be quickly talking about, systems and whatnot, and I just want to very quickly kind of explain how the market is segmented out so that while I'm going through some of the case studies, you can recognize some of what I'm talking about. So the green roof industry is divided into 3 general market types. There is the light, thin systems. They generally are extensive, sort of monoculture vegetation, so one type of vegetation or maybe 2 over a broad area. The second type is the modular or tray type systems. This was very popular in Europe a while ago, but has sort of declined as the market has matured and downward price pressure has happened. But in North America, it's still a very robust market. These are basically green roof in a box. So you have your drainage capacity, you have your growth media, you have your vegetation all in one unit that can be then placed on a roof with other units, and then you have instant green roof. And the last type is the garden system. So these are more your accessible green roofs, where sometimes you'll have trees and shrubs and you might have walkways or benches or typical landscape garden features in it. So you'll see a little of all of these when I go through the case studies that I'm going to present. Green roofs are a major investment. Now, I imagine that if you have a massive campus, maybe these numbers aren't that huge, but overall, compared to many other items, a green roof is not cheap. The average installed cost for a green roof is about 15 to 30 bucks. However, it could be far more than that if it's more of an intensive garden type green roof. Add that to the roof membrane, which, you might have $7 to $15 per square foot. Green roofs generally, there's always very large ones. As you saw, we've participated in some very large ones, but I would say the average one is more like around 5,000 square feet, or as the roofing industry calls them, 50 squares. So you're looking at an average investment of over $100,000 to over $200,000. Not chump change. Now, what about warranty for these green roofs? It's quite interesting because green roofs are associated with the roofing industry. So in the roofing industry, it's quite common to have 10, 15, 20, even 30-year warranties. Although I really caution you to read the fine print in a lot of these warranties. But in the green roof industry, a 2-year warranty is most common. And so it's kind of interesting because I think the obvious reason why a green roof company would want to warrant only for 2 years is because we're dealing with living plants. And living plants require care. They can't just function on their own, especially in a limited growing media environment. So at ground level, a plant may have several feet of soil to work with. On a rooftop level, often we're talking about just a few inches of soil. So All of these green roofs require maintenance, and that is why most green roof manufacturers will limit their warranty. And if you want to extend that warranty to much or many more years, maintenance is always going to be a very large part of the option for getting an extended warranty. Okay, so let's talk about the good. So my presentation, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's talk about the good first. So what are best practices in the industry? Well, on a maintenance side of things, I think the best practice is you have to be committed to the care of these green roofs. I have done many presentations, and I often warn people, if you are not going to maintain your green roof, please do not install one, because the damage to a roofing system, the damage to the inside of the building through leaks and deterioration is too expensive to ignore the green roof for very long. So you have to be committed to its care. What does that look like? Well, it looks like, you know, putting out multi-year maintenance contracts to make sure, just like at ground level, often you put out multi-year maintenance contracts to make sure the grass gets cut and the trees are pruned and shrubs are clipped, etc. Perennials are deadheaded, and you name it. So multi-year, because if you only get 1-year contracts, just keep rolling over 1-year contracts, generally a lot of contractors are going to look like that, and they will price it a lot different than if they were assured that they could count on that project and see the result of their work over several years. There will be a requirement, a minimum requirement of monthly visits during the growing season. So up in the north, you might be looking at 1 visit every 6 or 7, or sorry, for 6 or 7 months. And in the south, obviously, you'd be looking at more year-round. It's also important to understand that green roofs require specialization, not because the plants are so complicated, but because working on a roof is complicated. So understanding how to get products on a roof and off a roof, understanding what types of fertilizers and other chemicals can be used and can't be used, understanding how irrigation systems work, all of that is incredibly important, and that's why it requires a bit of specialization. So your average landscape contractor would need to have a lot of other practices in their toolbox in order to undertake green roof maintenance. Unfortunately, the bad part of this is that green roofs are often out of sight, out of mind. These are roofs that are installed not for their aesthetic value because no one can see them, but for other reasons. So let's say a city has a grant program or a bylaw that requires green roofs, or has credits for stormwater if you put a green roof on. There's all sorts of government incentives, bylaws, mandates out there, and they push people to put green roofs on. The problem is these green roofs are often never seen by anybody. So out of sight, out of mind. Keep in mind that the average maintenance cost of a green roof would cost maybe somewhere from 12 cents to 70 cents a square foot. And that's totally dependent on the type of green roof. So, you know, I would say most of your extensive sort of succulent ground cover type green roofs, very simple green roofs, they'd be in that low end. So, and they constitute about probably 70% of the green roofs out there. But related to that, related to those best care practices, is you have to make sure that the green roof you have was built to last. And this is where things can get complicated. So let's first talk about what needs to be there right from the outset. So number one, I'm always amazed at how people will cheap out on the roof membrane in order to afford the green roof. And quite frankly, when you have to tear a roof membrane up, it doesn't really matter how much well, it does, sorry, if you were to tear up a roof membrane, you'd obviously have a lot more to do because of the green roof on top of it. So you want to make sure that the membrane system you have in place is belts and suspenders, robust, can handle a moist environment, which a lot of roofing membrane warranties will exclude a moist environment. You have to ensure that there is clear drainage below this green roof, meaning that once the green roof has sort of used all the water it can or holds all the water it can, you want any excess water to be able to drain off the roof in a clear fashion, a nice clean drainage course to make sure excess water gets to the drain. You want to make sure that the plants that were planted are appropriate for that region, or you'll find you're struggling constantly to keep these plants alive. And the last thing is, I talk about an irrigation system, but quite frankly, there's too many roofs that get built and people don't understand that there has to be an irrigation system or an irrigation source somewhere on the rooftop. Otherwise, you're completely dependent on the weather. Green roofs can dry out quicker than you would at ground level because of the thin medias. So it's important to have some sort of available source, if not a complete system, at least a source where watering can take place. Here's just an example of how things can work well. So this green roof was installed properly. I happened to be at this site during the whole installation process and able to observe every aspect of it. So it was installed properly. And the beauty is, when you look at this system several years later, because it was also maintained under a multi-year contract well, you get to enjoy this roof. Now, this happens to be at a hospital where a lot of patients are looking out over this roof. And the whole idea of green spaces in hospital environments has been well documented to contribute a lot to wellness for patients. However, there's also situations like this. This was a school. At its onset, this school green roof looked like this. This was just after installation. It was an award-winning school. It had all sorts of cool, sustainable technology. This area here was actually meant to be a bit of an area for the students to be able to participate in the garden. And so they were looking at it to sort of integrate into their biology classes. And as you can see, it's kind of a neat looking outdoor space right now. Installed cost ended up to be about $60 a square foot, mostly because it had a lot of different elements to it. There's fencing, there's, you can see an arbor, fences, decking, walkways, you name it. So it was a little more expensive than most. The total investment was a little over $200,000 installed, and it was installed in 2010. Well, after the 2 years of maintenance that were included as part of the installation were done, it went 8 years without any maintenance whatsoever. And this is what it looked like. What a shame. Essentially, the entire green roof just became overgrown. There was damage. Some volunteers had gone in there and tried to do some stuff on it and ended up cutting through a lot of the irrigation lines. It was just basically a mess. The cost of the maintenance would have been about $10,240. In fact, we know this for a fact. If they had to maintain that roof, that's what it would have been the cost. Instead, to restore the roof, because of all the damage that had been done, the cost of restoration ends up to be $78,000. Now, the beauty of this situation, and I know it's hard to look at beauty of the situation, is it's a gorgeous looking roof now. It was all redone, right? But the underlying roof system was actually done correctly. So this was more of a situation where the plantings had to all be redone, the deck had to be recoated, a bunch of other work like that had to be done, but the fundamental system did not have to be changed. So 78,000 was actually fairly reasonable for the amount of work that needed to be done. So talking about, built to last, there's some very simple things that should really be on every green roof. And one of those is roof drain protection. So too often we see roof drains handled very poorly. Essentially, a roof drain should be isolated from the vegetation and the growing media. And that's where these roof drain inspection chambers come from. So it's got a solid lid on top. Seed, debris cannot blow into the roof drain area. When you pop it open, it should be clean. There should be no evidence of growing media falling into this area and clogging the drain. There should be no evidence of any vegetation that's fallen in. And that is essentially the best practice for roof drain. However, too often this is the practice for roof drains, where somebody thinks that, by putting a perforated ring around the roof drain, the plants are going to somehow respect that boundary. And naturally, plants grow wherever they find a happy home. In this case, growing media fines blew in over top of the drain, and before you know it, plants start growing up right on top of the roof drain. Here's another example. They tried their best, another perforated cover, and they put a box around it, and you can't see it, but there was some aggregate in that box. Well, again, plants are not respecters of those kind of boundaries. The only way to do it is by isolating that roof drain from the plant material. Another great example, this was on an award-winning roof, green roof, and I went and looked at it. This was about 1 year after it had been installed, and you can see the plants are already overtaking the gravel area around this roof drain, and eventually they will completely cover that whole area because they will follow the water. And essentially, just by putting stone around a roof drain, you will not stop the plants from getting to that drain. Here's a last really obvious example. Again, they just threw some pebbles around the roof drain, put the cap on, and called it a day. But if we took the cap off, you can see that the vegetation has now truly compromised that roof drain. And this has broad effects. So what happens is the slower that roof drains, the more it's going to supersaturate back into the system, the more it's going to either load the roof, find its way to weak points in the roof membrane system, or supersaturate the growing media and eventually kill the plants. So I'm just going to keep going through these case studies to show you some ideas on how these things can work well. So great example of bad design to good design. So here's a situation where they hadn't really done a good job of isolating the drains out. Well, usually this isn't a really bad or hard fix. So this roof drain was dug out, cleaned up, vacuumed out, and a proper inspection chamber was put over top. And now this is a simple case of just popping the pins and looking at the roof drain every so often to ensure that it's draining properly. Let's talk more about drainage protection. And the reason I want to do this is because when it comes to green roofs, I find most of the issues with green roofs have to do with not adequately protecting the drainage layer. So here's an example. You can see from the top, everybody goes, wow, beautiful. There's all this vegetation on top there. It looks wonderful. And it is. Here's the growth media that was placed below the vegetation underneath. So you're okay, there's a lot of growing media there. But what's important about this roof is not these elements, it's this element. What you see here is proper practice. This is protecting that drainage layer. So what you have here is a filter fabric that has been fully sealed over top of the drainage layer, meaning that no growth media can erode down into that drainage layer. It's sealed up against the edging, it's sealed against all curbs, all of the laps are sealed, and essentially that means this green roof will end up looking good for many, many years. Let's look at another situation. So this is a project that, again, had been neglected for quite a long time. It wasn't completely gone, so an assessment was done, and the initial vegetation here was actually a low-growing sedum ground cover. And what happened is, because it had been neglected for so long, it just became a massive field of weeds. And so we did a quick assessment on it, and we discovered a few things. One, when we opened up around the edging, and edging has to have drainage slots to allow drainage through. The problem was they laid an impervious root barrier over top of the drainage holes. So what was happening is this roof was not able to get rid of the water that was building up behind this edging. It also had an issue with the drains. The roof drains were covered up and they were not effectively draining. So we looked at all this. However, it did have some, underlying drainage products and whatnot that were salvageable. So it wasn't like it had to be a complete tear off. So what was done is, one, we pulled all the growth media away from the edge of this edging. We cut back that impervious membrane, installed a filter fabric to the inside edge, and then replaced everything. Pretty simple fix without having to tear out an entire roof. This will ensure that water can then go through that edging without backing up and finding its way to the drain. That's what it looks like once it's done. There also was no irrigation system. So one of the problems with no irrigation is, if no one is paying any attention and there's not enough water, like say you have a very dry year, then the intended vegetation here just wasn't surviving well. And therefore, a lot of plants that do survive well in that situation will start to grow up in their place. So once all those invasive weeds and everything were dealt with, decision was made to install an automatic irrigation system, and that was installed. We always recommend rotary because it's quite efficient, but also less prone to damage than, say, a drip system. And this is what it looks like later on. So in this particular case, the roof itself was not built too badly. There were some issues with the design, but they were corrected. This roof was not let go for too long a period of time. So essentially, drain inspection chambers were put in. The edging issue was dealt with. The weeds were dealt with. And then they realized, okay, if we're going to have a green roof, we really need to maintain it. So they signed up for a multi-year maintenance program. That's the way it should be done. Okay, let's look at something a little uglier. So this is a case where a green roof was installed, and often you get this with condominium situations where in order to attract buyers, a green roof is a very sexy thing to have on a building, and a lot of buyers think, that isn't that cool? That's such a green building, environmentally responsible. So it's a very visible element for a roof. And the problem is once it was installed, it was never maintained, not once. So essentially, it was laid down and no one looked at it ever again. Well, over time, naturally, the green roof just started to die off, and the intended vegetation was almost non-existent. So essentially, there's nothing that can be done here. When you see moss growing up like this, it's usually a sign of supersaturation, that the roof can't drain properly. So the only solution here was to remove. So essentially, the entire green roof had to be removed, right down to the drainage layer. Now they had used stone as a drainage layer, and the stone was in good shape. It wasn't sort of filled with media or anything like that. So we were able to maintain the stone, otherwise it would have been very expensive, and lay down a new green roof system, as well as install an irrigation system. So this was an example of an ugly situation where a green roof had been installed, completely neglected, the vegetation had died off, but there was enough there to not have to do a complete tear out. So again, this could all be avoided if it had just been dealt with properly at the beginning. Replacement cost for the new green roof, $109,000. And naturally, again, once they discovered this, they were much more keen to sign up for a multi-year maintenance program after going through all this trouble. Another ugly problem that has not had such a great solution. So the problem was the roof simply was not draining. They were starting to get water backing up against a lot of the flashing details, and it was resulting in some leaks into the building. Essentially, there was nothing that could be done. The intended vegetation was virtually dead other than a few sprigs here and there. The growth media had gone sour, meaning that it was no longer viable for growing plants. And there was really nothing to do here. When we sort of started digging into this green roof, we discovered that a pre-vegetated mat had just basically been laid on the roof with no drainage course whatsoever. Then they had thrown stone on top of this mat to weigh it down. That was essentially the green roof. We did a little further inspection and dug a little deeper, so we discovered there's no drainage layer. Because there's no drainage layer, there's no ability for the insulation to diffuse vapor, which is a big issue with polystyrene insulation. So you have to have some sort of air layer. Dow calls for around 70% air space above the insulation to allow for vapor diffusion. So that couldn't happen. So you were compromising the integrity of the insulation. And as I said, water was backing up to the flashings, and there was damage in the interior of the building. The solution was basically a tear-off. There really was nothing to be done here. If there's no existing drainage layer below, there's really nothing you can do other than tear it off and start over. So to replace the roof with a proper functioning green roof was about $138,000. And that did not include any of the roofing repairs. So you can understand that just by this sheer neglect, the cost to deal with these issues later can be quite expensive. I'm going to sort of end with this largest project to date that I've seen that has gone awry. So here's a project with about 65,000 square feet of trays, or about 1.5 acres. And it was installed for a cost of around 1.6. And that was an estimate because I couldn't get exact numbers from my research, but I estimated around 1.65 million. The roof membrane below it is a modified bitumen roof system. So what was the problem with it? Well, the vegetation was dying progressively from the time it was installed to this is about 4 years later. The vegetation had just been declining more and more every year. The other issue that was becoming concerning is underneath the green roof, there was premature degranulation of the surface of the roof system, and that can become a big problem and void the warranty. So we had to do a little bit further investigation. So here's what we found during our discovery. First of all, the drainage area that was sort of built into the bottom of these trays was clogged. It was clogged with media fines. And that's just the fine particulate matter that comes with the growing media. It was just accumulating all along below the trays. The other issue we found is this particular tray didn't lock together. So again, there was too much opportunity for erosion, and there was no filter fabric protection layer. So here's where it really becomes an issue, where if a product does not abide by certain simple protocols, they can turn into big problems. And often they're not problems at the beginning. So everybody gets very excited. Oh, look, we have a wonderful looking green roof. It's all pre-vegetated, so it looks beautiful. But as years go on, and this is where facility managers have to pick up, they have to deal with the aftermath of this. So if a green roof system has been poorly chosen, poorly designed, just has a lot of issues with it, it usually shows up several years later, not at the beginning. There's a couple things to keep in mind with every green roof system. Every green roof system, whether it is a thin, lightweight one, whether it's a modular system, whether it is a garden system, must have a clear air layer below the growth media. In other words, we have to have that air layer so that any excess moisture can move under the green roof and find its way to the roof drains. And I always stress that it's excess moisture. So any blockage of that air layer becomes an issue, because then it prevents moisture from draining. The end result is either you are pushing up against flashing details, or you're super saturating the media, killing the plant material. All green roofs require a filter fabric protection sheet of some sort. If you have growth media, you need to protect your drainage layer. It's as simple as that. If there's no filter fabric, and unfortunately some practitioners say, oh, our product doesn't need filter fabric. If you have holes in your product that allows fines from your growth media to fall through, you need filter fabric. So you need to protect that layer, and filter fabric is a way of sort of detailing like a bathtub for soil, so that that drainage layer is not going to be compromised. And in particular, trays should be tightly locked together. If they are allowed to separate, or if they're not installed well and they just kind of shift or move in any way, then that also allows growth media to fall down into that drainage area and affect drainage on the roof. In particular, if you have green roofs, or sorry, roof membranes that do not allow for a constantly moist condition and will deteriorate, you will find that your warranty will not cover that. So you need to make sure that when you have a system on your roof, and you have a roof system and a green roof together, that they are compatible. And unfortunately, again, this is not being well understood in the industry. And I am now sort of looking at all these problems after the fact, and having to give the bad news to a lot of people. So what was the solution to this particular situation? Well, it's ugly. There's no choice here but to remove and dispose of the green roof trays. Basically, underneath them was clogged. The growth media had fallen down, so the depth of the growth media was not correct. The plant material was dying. So there's really nothing that can be salvaged out of this situation. You have to remove and dispose the green roof trays, clean the roof area, repair that roof membrane system, and install a proper system. The cost of this, compared to the initial installation, $2.2 million. Now this is an extreme example because it's a large green roof. It's 1.5 acres, but it really emphasizes how terribly important it is that you understand the system that's been placed on your rooftop and the damage that can be done if it's not a system that protects that drainage layer properly. Now I'll tell you this, the even sadder situation here. So this was only half of this roof area. The other half was about 85,000 square feet. That half was done with a completely different system, one that did protect the drainage layer, one that had all the requisite items in place, properly installed, and it was functioning beautifully. So you see the moisture on the cap sheet here. On the previous pictures, you see moisture in various areas as well. The difference is that underneath this system, that moisture is not escaping from the one, and it is escaping from the other. So you can understand that if you do something properly, and this is a great example of side by side, two different systems, one deteriorating over time, one thriving because it was done correctly. Okay, so let's do a bit of a review here. So we have the good. So the good, in terms of good green roofs are properly designed and installed. They have all of those requisite things. They have a proper drainage layer, fully protected from media erosion. They have the drains, the roof drains, all fully protected so that they are not subject to interference from plant material. They have the right plants for the area, but they also will be under multi-year maintenance contracts. And often that maintenance contract is tied to a warranty coverage. So one way that manufacturers get out of their obligations is if you don't maintain your roof according to their maintenance program, you will not have a warranty. So having a multi-year maintenance contract that's tied to the warranty coverage gives you the right combination. And obviously you need to contract to a competent maintenance contractor, someone who knows how to work on a rooftop, who understands the vegetation, who understands the system and how it should be working. And if you do those things, the results are all what they are intended to be. So, you know, if you talk to people in the industry, they always tell you that, oh, green roofs do this, 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 and this. They're so wonderful, but they're only wonderful if these things are done correctly. So the results you'll get is you'll get basically the lowest long-term cost. I think I've shown that if you think you're saving money by neglecting maintenance, well, by the time you repair, you will not have saved a dime compared to just maintaining it over the course of the life of the green roof. Obviously, by having maintenance and warranty together, you have a lot of product assurance. You'll have the highest long-term performance. So if you have a green roof that you've looked for in terms of a cost-benefit ratio, so let's say how much energy savings will I get from cooling the roof of the building, that sort of thing. Well, if that green roof is functioning properly, you're going to get the best long-term performance. Okay, so then the bad to review. The bad is where you have a system that has just some minor flaws, so things that can be fixed without too much trouble, like putting an inspection chamber in over a roof drain, cleaning that roof drain, but if everything else has been done correctly, that's a pretty easy fix. Fixing up along the edging, maybe installing a simple irrigation system. Those sort of things can be dealt with. Often I say minimal warranty coverage because this is kind of where you have your 2-year warranty coverage and then people tend to forget about the green roof until it's a problem. So the results of this sort of installation situation of maintenance neglect, usually these situations are restorable. So that's the good news. The bad news is obviously it's going to have a higher long-term cost and your cost-benefit ratio is going to go down. So if your roof system is not functioning correctly, you're not going to get the cost-benefit ratio that you often intended. And then let's go to the ugly. So the ugly is where, unfortunately, somebody slapped down a green roof system and didn't recognize the problems with the system. So the one green roof that I showed you earlier on, where there was no drainage layer underneath a pre-vegetated mat. I happen to know that that was done by a roofing contractor that just sort of assumed that this is how they get done, and he just threw it down and essentially thought, well, that was inexpensive. And now, you know, years later, after the property had been turned over to a condominium corporation or HOA, basically now they have to deal with the results of that installation. It usually comes along with maintenance neglect. So, you know, you have something that's improperly installed or designed. You can have a poor system choice, kind of like I showed you that tray that allows media to just fall through it. And naturally, a lot of manufacturers use the escape type warranty coverage. And it's something that you always have to read the fine print of your warranty coverage to see what you actually have covered in case you have problems. The results of those kind of roofs are not, they're really the saddest example. Basically, it's replace and repair. Usually replace the green roof and replace and or repair the roofing system. Totally lost investment. If you're even going to replace it, what we often see is people just so upset about the green roof that they just say, forget it, just put a regular ballasted roof instead. That's really unfortunate that that happens. And this is why I do these presentations, so that that sort of thing can happen far less. Major long-term costs, obviously your cost benefit ratio here is kind of zero, because in fact it may even be negative, because you're going to have to start over. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is, okay, I've shown you all these horror stories. I've shown you how it should be done, how it shouldn't be done, what the results of these things are. You have a green roof. Okay, you have a green roof on one of your buildings that you're responsible for. What should you do? Well, the first thing I would suggest is understand what you have. So this means that you go back to the drawings, usually shop drawings from the installation, any literature about the system, the warranty coverage, etc. Go back and make sure you understand what you have. Then, if you like, you can go out and yourself, you can just dig down and find out what the layers are. And be assured that you have, below the vegetation and media, you have filter fabric and you have a clear drainage course. Okay, those are absolutely critical. Second, if your roof drains are open to the elements, then they're also open to the interference of vegetation. So install inspection chambers. Spend the money to get these inspection chambers over the roof drain so that you're isolating anything from interfering with the drains on the roof. If you have an irrigation system, make sure it's working. We have had situations where someone had a completely functional, intact irrigation system, but they forgot to turn it on and they lost all the vegetation on their roof during an extended drought period. So if you have a system, make sure it's working, make sure it's properly maintained. The number of irrigation systems that have been destroyed in the Northeast because of freezing environments, I would say a contractor not blowing out the lines prior to the winter and splitting all the lines on the roof. It's just sad that that happens because there's no way to detect where all the splits are. So it's really almost like installing a new irrigation system. So make sure it's maintained, make sure it's working, or if there's not a system, make sure you have a roof bib or a hose bib on the roof so that people can hook up either a temporary system or even hand water. And naturally engage a competent green roof maintenance contractor. Okay, that's the easy part. The hard part is you have a noticeable green roof problem. You say your green roof just doesn't look like you think it should look like. Either it's not, the vegetation isn't thriving, Maybe you're having some drainage issues, etc. Again, same thing, review what you have, make sure you know exactly what you have. And at this point, I would say have a proper assessment done. So by an expert who can come and determine what the issues are and what the potential fixes are. And then the last thing is just follow those recommendations. I would say most honest green roof brokers will tell you the straight up truth about what is required. And then it's a matter of whether you can deal with it or not. That is it for my presentation. I think I'm right on time. So Billy, let's open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you. We have several questions.
Okay.
Our first question is the protection of the roof drain in the specification or scope of the work when it's first done?
There is, unfortunately, it's not the most common thing. So I would say it should be, but unfortunately, there's a number of practitioners who don't require it in their specifications, and that's unfortunate because it always comes back to bite you in the end.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, how many inches of water a week do sedum tiles need?
Well, I would say a week. I mean, your average lawn takes about an inch of water a week. Sedum tile or sedum in general takes far less than that. Now, keep in mind that there's quite a difference in water requirements of a new installation versus an established installation. So a new installation, you're going to have to keep that product moist until it has fully rooted down. In an established installation, so something that's been there for a season or two, I would say, you know, an inch of water every few weeks would be plenty. Sedum is quite drought tolerant, not 100% drought tolerant. In other words, it's not so great in some parts of the southern states, but overall it doesn't require as much water as many other plants. So.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, watching from east coast of Canada, we get temperatures below 25 degrees here in the winter. What's your best advice to winterizing a green roof so it doesn't end up on that ugly list?
Well, being a Canadian myself, that's a easy question for me to answer. So number one is ensuring that the right plant material has been chosen for your location. So that is absolutely number one. If the system has been properly designed, then really there's not a lot you need to do other than if you have an irrigation system, opening and closing procedures, blowing it out in the fall, opening it in the spring. Outside of that, essentially your green roof can go dormant over the winter months and should revive in the spring.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. Given that green roofs have many microclimates, how can you ensure that you've selected the right plants for the green roof?
Oh, that's a good question. So one of the issues we have is often landscape architects are involved with green roofs, and their experience is ground level plant material. Green roofs are very different from a ground level experience. So what you think might work at ground level may not necessarily work in a green roof environment. The only thing I can say is you need to talk to an expert. So our company has done green roofs all over North America, from, you know, down in Florida and Laredo, Texas, all the way up to the northern parts of Canada and everywhere in between. So we've managed to accumulate a lot of experience in terms of what plants work where. There are other people like us out there, but I would say that you need to talk to an expert. to be absolutely assured that these are the plants that'll work in your area.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What is the life expectancy of a well-maintained green roof?
I would say the life expectancy would be the life expectancy of the roof membrane. So, you know, like ground level landscapings, they can be, you know, kept going perpetually for many, many, many decades. Usually the limitation is more how long can the membrane last. So I would say that the life expectancy, if it's all been designed, if everything's been done correctly, it's as long as the roofing membrane.
Okay. Next question. Where do I look to find a competent green roof contractor?
Oh, that's another great question. So there are quite a few green roof specialists in most major markets in North America. I would say that you're welcome to contact us or any one of our reps, and we can sort of direct you to installers or maintainers in your area.
Okay, thank you. Next question. My school has a lot of volunteers. Could they be used to maintain the green roof?
Oh, please no. Yes, I should say yes, they probably could be, but they're going to have to be monitored, and they probably would require some training. We've had situations where volunteers have made an absolute disaster of a green roof because they just didn't understand the damage that they were doing. We had a hospital green roof that was not set up for regular cultivation, and someone decided to turn it into a volunteer garden for vegetables, and they ended up damaging a lot of the green roof components and the underlying roof system. So there is a great deal of risk to having volunteers that are untrained, especially working at heights.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What is the payback term for most green roofs?
The payback, and when we talk about payback, so payback is usually related to performance. So there's often stormwater, there's cooling benefits, energy benefits. There could also be grant programs, or there could be savings that are allowed based on the water system in particular regions, like Philadelphia is one that I know of. When it comes to a grant program, depending on the size of the grant, the payback can be very quick. But I would say if you're looking at a performance on a performance basis, it's maybe a little longer than photovoltaics. So photovoltaics are generally looked at to pay back in 10 years. I would say a green roof could pay back in about 12 to 15, but shorter depending on, you know, programs in your particular region.
Okay, we have time for one more question here. Do you have any annual inspection recommendations? Maybe like a checklist that would help facility managers understand what they should be looking for?
Yes, we do, and I would be happy to give that to whoever is asking the question, or even somehow through this Billy, if there's some way to do it through you. But yes, we not only produce checklists for architects and engineers, we also produce checklists for facility managers.
Yes, we can attach it to the follow-up email that'll go out tomorrow. So that's the end of our questions for today. Rick, I want to thank you for a very, very interesting hour of conversation. And to our attendees, thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to be with us today. So until next time, be safe, stay healthy, get vaccinated, have a great day. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.